So great to meet you again, great to see you again. I can remember being in Mick and Joy's home group back in the middle 90s when we were at Westview, so it's lovely to see you again.
It does, yeah. Yeah. Well, I bring greetings from the Westview Baptist Church. I don't know if any of you remember Mary Mills, but she sends her love to you as well. I'm really pleased to come back here. I may look old, and no, I am old. I remember as I was about 13, they started putting pictures up on the wall in the Westview Baptist Church of this building that was being built on the Grange estate. And it was a new church for the Grange estate. And eventually it opened. And when I was I think about 17 or 18, I used to come up and do stuff here. There wasn't any rooms at the side there, so Sunday school had to be down at the school there. And I don't remember Ruth and Roland Wedderall, and some others. We used to help them run the Sunday school over there. And I believe Ruth is still alive, so it's great. It was good times. The youth fellowship down at Westview occasionally came up and did what we call a work evening. And they used to come up and do some cleaning, tidying, and work out in the garden. And there was some cement posts that we dug holes for to put in down the side of the car park. Yeah, that was some good nights. Does anybody remember the lights that used to be here? Great big glass bowl things. Well, one of these occasions, I was up at a step ladder, and I was taking the glass shade off to change the bulb. You had to take the glass shade off, and it was in my hands, and the rope that was holding the stepladder broke. Yeah, that's what I thought. But there was a chap named Dave Ross, who would probably be a contender for Strongman of the Year. He just turned around and went like this, and grabbed both halves of the ladder while I climbed down and then rescued it. Otherwise, I dread to see what could happen to me in this glass bowl. Yeah, we had some interesting times. Nice to see some young people here this morning. We had a Friday night youth fellowship, we called it, and there were families that moved in from London used to move in here, and they weren't always the nicest of children. They used to kick the door in until we opened up and let them in. And then when it was about the epilogue time, they would be kicking the door to let them out. And we had some very interesting times with them. But it was the start of the youth work. I'm probably now the longest serving person at Westview. Started going to the Sunday school when I was about 8 or 9, and I've gone through various activities over the years, done a lot of work with the youth work. We still run a little youth group on a Wednesday night now, help with Sunday school, an elder now. Yeah, does anybody remember Adventure Week? Yeah, I was around when Mr. Holland had a committee meeting where that idea was formed. I think that ran for about 45 years, was it? I only ever missed one, because I used to have to take holiday from work to do it. That's when I used to be an engineer, and I wasn't allowed to have the holiday time off to do it, because everybody that had children used to get the first preference. So that was the only one I missed. It was great times. So I believe there are some people here today from Hitchin Boys School. Good to see you. Now they know what I know, only I don't know about them. But I do know that you've got a very good design technology department, and for my sins, I became a teacher after I'd done 18 years as an engineer, and I was a design technology teacher. And what I'd like you to do for me this morning is to help. You haven't got to come out here, it's all right. I'm not going to embarrass you too much. But on the table over there are some of these. Now, I'm going to ask for my pictures to come up on the screen. This fits in with the message. I must just warn you now. Starting off with a horrible piece of wood. Now, as I say, some of them know my youngest son, and just during the summer, my daughter got married, and she lives up Cleobury, Mortimer, which is quite a long way from Kidderminster heading towards Wales, and she brought these branches of tree to me down here, and she said, I would like 108 of these, please. And this is just so you sort of what she sort of gave to us was 4 long branches like that to make these things. So if we can move on to the next one, please. I then had to use my bandsaw to cut the thinness of them out, and then moving on, each one I then had to sand both sides to make it nice and smooth, and then eventually get some really smooth glass paper, to really sand it and get it lovely and smooth, to get that wow factor where you go like that, oh, that's nice. It's the sort of thing you feel in design technology, and you think, oh, that really feels really good. Well, was there one more? No, there is one more picture. The one with the black mick, well, it's brown actually, mick on it, that was done with a Pyro pen. And my daughter wrote all her guest names on each one of these bits of wood. I don't mean 100 names on each bit of wood. I mean one bit of wood for one name. And they looked really nice round the tables, sat where we were supposed to sit. And I thought it could be a nice idea this morning to explain what I'm talking about. What I've done, I've cut some of these, and they're on the table over the back there, and I've warned the 2 ladies sitting there that you might come over. And on the other one side is rough, and I wanted to leave it rough for a purpose, but on the other side, I'd like to sand this to a wow factor. And then if you'd like to write your name on it, please do. There's some pens there that will actually do that for you without spreading down the grains. So, if I could just say 2 or 3 at a time, if you want to wander over, have a go, see how you get on. I'd be pleased, and I hope you'd be pleased to have a go as well. So, any time in the next probably hour and a half. No, honest. No. So, where are we? Sorry, I've said all that. Right, yeah. Going back to the church building, we started off coming up sometimes on a Sunday evening to hold a service. Then gradually a few families decided to leave Westview and come to the church and to stay here and help consolidate the work, establish it, and to see the work grow. And they went with our blessing, and obviously the work did grow. Then when they no longer needed the support of Westview, they then said, we want to cut the umbilical cord, so to speak, and it became an independent church of their own, which was brilliant. So I'm pleased to say that here you are, alive and kicking, well, alive and worshipping God. And I said, any times I tend to come back now are at funerals, which is a bit sad. I think the last one was my mother-in-law about a year ago, Hilda Axon, if you remember her. She used to come regularly when she could. Towards the end, she was getting a bit, find it difficult to get out. I just remember what I'll be given an emergency pack. Rescued. So the two bits of wood that, or these bits of wood over there, come from two sorts of wood. There are only two sorts. There's deciduous and there's coniferous. Coniferous could be evergreens as well. The deciduous trees, they lose their leaves in winter. I'm sure you all know that one. But for the benefit of the children, their worksheets, I had to tell you that. Okay. The nice thing about God is that he can take anyone and use them for his glory. It doesn't matter how young you are, how old, how talented you are, how clever, even what your behaviour's like. If you get tempers, if you get angry, he can take you and use you to his glory. And what he does, he improves our behaviour. We start to see, well, perhaps the bad bit shouldn't be what I should be doing, and you improve it. And he understands people's needs, and it helps us to understand that other people have needs. He helps us not to lose our temper. He helps us not to get angry. He helps us to be calm when the crisis arises. Helps us to be honest. Helps us to be helpful and forgiving, and to help us share our faith with others and be really helpful to the church and the people we get to know in just general life. He will prosper you. That doesn't mean to say you will get rich. Some people do, but generally most of us don't. But if we give generously to God, in our time, in our money, in our efforts, he will meet all your needs. And I can say that from personal experience, that he does meet all our needs. And he'll change that raw sinner that I was up to, I think about 18 when I became a Christian. And he turned me into somebody that I like to think has been helpful and kind, and people can respect what I'd say, what I do, and can praise God. I can remember a long time back at Westview, there was a blind lady that used to come, Miss Streeter, and she wanted somebody to put a shelf in a larder for her. Well, I'd only just been a couple of years as an apprentice, so I learned how to use a drill and screw things together and whatever. So I volunteered to put this shelf in this cupboard. It was the first time I've ever tried to put a shelf in a cupboard at all. But it stayed there and it worked. And for a long time after that, I lived off the praise and the glory of having put this shelf. Because she would tell anybody and everybody that was interested that this Mick Cornell had put this shelf in her cupboard and it made life so much better for her. It was great. There was that wow factor for a while. But I'm going to take Joseph this morning, if you hadn't noticed earlier on. Joseph was the subject for my talk, so I'm not going to go through his whole life, but I'm going to go through steps in his life. Because Joseph was an irritating teenager. He was one of those cocky people that really get on your nerves and do great. And he was the father's favourite son because he was born of his favourite wife and late in his life. And he made him the now famous coat of many colours and trinkets and whatever else with ornaments on. And when the other sons used to go out looking after the flocks, he would notice what they were getting up to And he would go back to Dad and say, "Hey, Dad, you know what they were doing?" And he would tell on them, and Dad would get cross. And that really irked to these boys. And he then had some dreams. One dream was they were all binding the corn up into sheaves, and his sheaf stood up, and all the other sheaves bound down to his sheaf. And that really upset them. They thought, "We're going to bow down to you." No chance, you know. And then he had another dream. This time the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to him. And even Dad says, "Hey, come on, do you think we're all going to bow down to you?" And the boys got really bitter and angry. But Joseph thought, one day, I'm sure they're going to. The nice thing about the dad was, it was a bit like Mary when all these things happened to Jesus at the beginning of his life. Mary pondered these things in her heart, didn't she? Well, that's what the dad did, Jacob. He thought about that and kept it in the back of his mind. Well, they used to look after the sheep, and they sometimes had to move the sheep on to somewhere else where the grass was better. And the 11 other brothers went off to look after sheep and find pasture land. It's quite a long way away they had to go. And after a while, the dad was getting a bit worried and said, "Here, Joseph, how about you go in and find them, see how they're getting on, and come back and tell me how they're doing." And so he said yes, and off he went. And they saw him coming, and at the same time, the brothers, that is, they saw this traders, a group of traders, the Midianite traders, coming on from a long distance away, and they thought, now's our chance. Here comes that dreamer. We're going to kill him. And Reuben, the oldest one, said, no, he's our brother. You can't kill him. And in the end, they decided to throw him in a pit. They're called a cistern. These are great big holes they used to dig to allow the rainwater to fill up so they could feed the cattle and the sheep and so on. And it was so deep that they couldn't get out. And he must have shouted and screamed, begged for mercy, to not let his brothers chuck him in this deep hole. He just couldn't get out of there. They were used as prisons at some time, apparently. But they did. They threw him in. And when the traders came along, they thought, no, he's our brother, he's our flesh and blood. Yeah, we didn't ought to kill him. Let's sell him. At this time, Reuben must have gone to see the sheep or something, because he wasn't there. And sure enough, they dragged him out the pit and sold him to these traders, and off they went. We don't know how he was, how bruised or battered he was, having been chucked down into this pit. But I wonder how he did feel. He must have felt pretty bitter, pretty sad, pretty hurt that his son, his brothers, could do this to him. Then they sold him, and instead of a brother with a good life, he's suddenly become a slave, the lowest of the low. It couldn't get much worse than being a slave. How did he feel? He must have felt pretty rotten. And in our illustration with the place names, the picture of the old bit of wood was probably how he felt. You know, sort of young, useless, and lousy. But, as we know, he was sold to Potiphar, who was captain of the king's guard, and he went into there to be a slave. Now, it wasn't just being a slave. He'd gone to Egypt, who spoke a different language. They had a different way of life. And suddenly he's in this place where he knows nothing. He is nothing. How did he feel? But God was with him. God had got this plan for him. And he worked hard at learning the language. He worked hard at what he had to do as a slave, to the point where the captain of the guard noticed that he was quite capable and started giving him other jobs to do, to the point where, I don't know how long it took, but it was probably a couple of years at least by the time he got used to the language and the way they lived and that, and getting to know all the things that the captain of the guard did. But he put him in charge. So that's quite a promotion, from being a slave to suddenly being a fairly important person. And he looked after his personal affairs as well. So that takes a lot of trust, doesn't it? Who would you give your wallet or purse to? It'd be someone that you trust, wouldn't it? You wouldn't do that. But he gave Joseph responsibility of everything. Now, unfortunately, he was handsome and probably well built and a pretty handy chap to look at. And Potiphar's wife started to take a fancy to him, and she tried hard to make him go to bed with her, but he was faithful to his master, and he refused. He said, I'm in charge of everything. How could I do a thing like that to my master? And she didn't like that. And one day, a situation arose where he ran off, and she had his coat, and she told a lie to the captain, who then believed her and had him thrown into prison. It didn't sound too good, prisons in those days, from what I've read. They were pretty awful. You didn't get much food, much good food. There weren't many facilities, certainly nothing for keeping your hair cut, having a wash and a shave in the morning, and changing your clothes for nice clean clothes every day. You just kept what you had on. And it must have been for quite some time. Now, how did he feel then? He's just got used to a nice life, responsibility, good food, and suddenly he's back with the lowest of the low. He's with prisoners. It's dark and dingy, probably only oil lamps, and probably very smelly, and not much food. But there were things that he could do to help the jailer. And it got to a point where the jailer thought, hey, he's a handy man. Yeah, I'll let him take control of that. And slowly he gave him more and more responsibility. And because God was with him, he was actually, in the end, in charge of the jail. So the jailer had not much to do. And he was probably very good at dealing with the prisoners. If you've had 11 brothers that hate you, you probably got used to living with some pretty rough people about, and there was probably some pretty rough prisoners in there. And it was difficult for him to shine for God in there, but he must have done. Then two of Pharaoh's helpers were thrown into prison as well. You all know this, the cupbearer and the baker. They were thrown into prison as well. And he was given the responsibility to look after these two as well. And they, after a while, both had dreams. And no one could interpret the dreams for them. They didn't understand what they were. But Joseph said, well, God interprets dreams. Tell me a dream and I'll just see if I can help you. And so they told him the dream, and he told them what reason was and what the answer was, you're going back to work, you've had it, and you're going. And sure enough, the cupbearer got his job back, and the baker was killed. And as he's going, the cupbearer said, "Don't forget to mention me to Pharaoh. I'm in here for not my fault. I'm in here." And unfortunately, by the time he got out, got himself sorted out and dressed properly, shaved, his hair cut, and presentable again, and got back into his job. By the time he'd done that, he'd forgotten all about Joseph. He was just pleased to have his job back. And so for another 2 years, poor old Joseph had to endure being in prison. And then Pharaoh had the king had the dream, and he didn't know what the dreams meant. And that's when the cupbearer suddenly remembered Joseph and said, "Hey, there's somebody in prison that can tell you the answer to dreams." And so he was called for. Now, this proves to be the end of his time in prison. So he's had the time where he's got really badly treated by his brothers. Probably, if you like, the first cut of the saw. So this time he's really badly treated by the captain of the guard and his wife. It's like that's the next rubbing off of the rough stuff. He had to change his character completely. So by the time he met the king, he was able to say, God knows the answers. He interprets dreams. There's nothing to do with him at all. He'd learned not to be selfish. He'd learned not to be proud, but to give the glory where it's due. And so when he told him that, well, the dream means you can have 7 years of plenty, good harvests, but follow that by 7 years of drought and bad times, you need to get some people to organise your country so that you can save up the food ready for when you won't have any food. And the king thought, well, he's the only one that could come up with the answer. He must be sensible and wise enough to do the job. So he gave Joseph the job to do that. And he made him the second most important person in Egypt. How do you think he felt then? From miserable to wow. When he drove around in the cart, people used to say "bravo" as he went by. Now that's completely different to what he was used to. And suddenly he had to learn how to live in the king's palace. Now I think he was probably fairly well prepared by living in the captain of the guard's home, but there was a lot more even in the king's palace. And so he had to find out and learn how to do this. But God gave him the wisdom and the common sense and everything else that he needed. In those 13 years, from when he was 17, he was now 30, he had changed a tremendous amount. And God blessed him because he worked hard, he was honest, he was fair, he was a good organiser and did a good job and gave God the glory. And that's the most important thing for us to remember, that when we do things well, it's because God has given us that ability. He's helped us to do it. He's given us that love, that care for other people. He's given us that common sense to be able to organise something. We've got a church secretary that looks at these, I can't think of the word now, important documents that go with running a church. Sorry, occasionally I get systems in my head where everything goes. But he can look through an important document and he can understand it. and make sense of it. And he's come back to us and says, well, look, the Charity Commission tells us we've got to do this. The bank tells us we've got to do things this way. And he can understand all that. But if I looked at it, I have a job looking at instructions, how to put a battery in a new toy. It's some people just got those sort of brains. And God gave Joseph the brain to really do important stuff. He went all around the country getting people to build barns and places to store the grain, and they did. And they had bumper crops for 7 years, and they really did come out of it well. So in the next 7 years, it wasn't quite so good because the food started running out. And it got to the point where Joseph's brothers lived, that they were running out of food as well. And without realising it, they came to find the food, and they actually had to ask their brother for food. Now, they didn't know he was his brother. He was their brother, because by now he'd got a different name. He'd been given the name Zaphenath Paneah, a nice one that flows off the tongue, doesn't it? But that was his name now. He also spoke a different language. So when these brothers came in, he could understand what they were saying, but they couldn't understand what he was saying. So he got an interpreter to talk with them. And it's interesting that his name actually means God speaks and he lives, which you tend not to think of Egypt as being a Christian country, but obviously he chose a good religious name for Joseph. So it got to the point where his brothers were standing before him. He was in power. They were begging. How did he feel at that moment? Now's my chance. I get my home back. Did he feel like that? But no. His first thought was, wonder how my dad is. So he got them to be asked about his family. Who were they? Where they come? How many other children are there? How's the father? Is the father still alive? And so on. Asking all the questions that was the sort of things that were going through his mind as far as the family is concerned. And he sort of, in a way, was, if you like, not cocky, but he said, I think you're spies. And they said, no, we're not, And I went on about how there was just 10 children that had come from their land, and there was one youngest one that's a favourite of the father now, and there was one that's not anymore, and they really tried to plead their case, but he could see a way of making this situation turn to his advantage, and without them knowing, to their advantage. And he said, so you've got a younger brother, have you? Well, if you want any more food, you're going to have to bring your brother back with you. And they said, no, we can't do that. He's the last one, and the father would die if he had to lose his other son. And they really got worried, desperate. And he said, I'm going to keep, Simeon was the one he chose, I'm going to keep Simeon in jail just to make sure that you come back. And they did it. And I thought, oh no, Dad's going to be furious. And eventually they went back, and they found that all their money had been put back into their bags. And they were horrified because they had paid, but they got the money back. And they didn't really know what to do. And the father said, what have you done? Have you stolen this? He was worried as well. And there came a point when they needed more food, and they had to go back again. And they said, look, the fellow was quite insistent. If we didn't bring the younger brother back, Benjamin, back with us, he wouldn't even see us, let alone serve us. And it took a lot of persuading for Jacob to let his youngest son Benjamin go with them. But they got desperate and need for food. So he said, yeah, you better go back. And off they went. And at the same time he said, well, take the money back, take enough for the next lot as well, give the money back, and take some presents with you to give him, to soften him a bit. And that's what they did. He was quite unfriendly to them again when they came back. And one of the things that surprised me was that in front of Joseph, they started saying, oh, this is all our fault. It was because what we did to Joseph. We sold our own brother, and evil is coming upon us because of what we've done. And they were recognizing that God was in this, that they felt that God was punishing them for what they did all those years ago. And poor old Joseph, in the end, had to just leave the room, and he had a good cry because it was his brothers, and he could see they were actually upset at what they'd done. They were repentant for what they'd actually done. And God was working in their lives and their minds as well. Anyway, in the end, he gave them what they wanted and sent them off home. And as they got to the boundary of the town, Joseph said, my silver chalice is missing. Bring them back. And they chased, obviously his guards and whatever, chased after them and said, you've got to come back. You've stolen a silver chalice from us. They said, no, we'll never do that. And they will quickly drag their bags off their donkeys and opened up. And in Benjamin's sack was this silver chalice. How do you think they felt at that moment? They didn't know that was Joseph. All they knew was that this horrible man could kill them, could make them slaves, and a disaster, they'd stolen this silver prized chalice. How did they feel then? And they felt pretty bad, pretty rotten. And they were dragged back into the court. And they started to say, oh, we didn't steal, we didn't, you know. And Joseph said, stop. Don't you recognize me? I'm your brother. And they looked at him in aghast. They hadn't realized it was their brother all that time that they've been speaking to. And they thought, oh no, that's it, we're done for now. But Joseph got hold of Benjamin and he hugged him and kissed him and said, look, I'm your brother. You're my main brother. They were both born to the same mother. The rest were born to different mothers. But this was his favourite brother. And there must have been a very awkward time of reunion there, because they knew what they'd done, and they knew that Joseph knew what they'd done. How was this going to pan out now? But Joseph said, you don't have to worry. I'm telling you now that you didn't send me to Egypt, God did. It was all part of his plan to save you, to save our family, and to save the country of Egypt. And he explained how it all happened. So that was, if you like, a happy ending to what could have been a really disastrous meeting. But the next thing was, because he'd got the king's blessing of how he ran the country, he told him that he was going to send for his father to come back and live here because they were in poverty or hunger where they were, and he wanted to bring them back so he could look after them. And his king said, great, and he gave him chariots and all sorts of things to take, to bring all the stuff, bring everything back, but don't worry about it. If you can't bring it, leave it there. We'll give you more than you need when you come. And that's what happened. And that's, if you like, the point where the last bit of shining came up on the bit of wood to make it a wow factor. There was Joseph, the position to really get his own back on his brothers, but he showed them his love, God's love, in sparing them. Now, the one personal thing that I find difficult about the next bit is that my father left home when I was only 18 months old, and I didn't meet him until I was 29. And the story where Joseph meets his father again after all this time always resonates with me, that I went down to Bridgewater, because that's where the family came from, to try and find him. Looked in the telephone directory. Those of you that are young enough will not know what a telephone directory is, but we're all thinking of red telephone boxes with books in that you could take out and read people's telephone numbers. And I saw our Cornell, and thought, right, we're going to knock on the door. Well, the first one we knocked on was his brother. It was Robert Cornell. And I have some strange things that I do, especially when I was younger. I scratched the wrong side of my head. And believe it or not, I used to have a lot of hair. Yeah, you comb it forward and cover my face with it at one point. We thought it was great at the time. But anyway, when we went to the door, my wife, or she wasn't my wife then, she was just my fiancée, she saw the father come to the door. It wasn't my father, but his son, who was about 16, 17, came to the door and went like that. And my wife said to two friends that come in and said, that's got to be a Cornell. And he did exactly the same thing. His hair was very similar to how mine was. It was very uncanny. And he said, oh, yeah, you're right. He lives just round the corner. He gave me the address where my father lived. So probably not the best way of doing things. He wouldn't do it this way now, but we just drove around and knocked on the door. He was at work apparently, but his present wife came to the door and said, oh, you want Roy? And I said, yes, please. And a 21-year-old lad came skipping down the stairs and looked at me and said, oh, you want my dad? And I just blurted out, oh, he's my dad too. And we all looked at each other, and the mother quickly sort of stepped up and said, he's at work at the moment, you better come back later. And so we went away. And she then had the pretty tricky situation of telling her 4 children that there was another family that they didn't know anything about, which was very awkward. But later on, we went back, and we were in the living room when he came home from work. And there was that strange moment where I met him. And we just sort of shook hands. It was really weird. Didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do because he didn't know whether I'd come to, so what is it, you're playing it, and, punching one. He didn't know what I was like. But eventually, we started talking, and we found that we had very similar sense of humour. The children all had similar likenesses. We sat down playing games, and it was very weird that we all got on so well very quickly. But it was that really magical moment when I met my father for the first time, And I've never forgotten that. It was obviously very emotional, because when I went home, or back to where we were staying, we went to bed, and I just burst into tears. No thought of it had come in at all, but just suddenly cried my heart out, because I'd met my father, and all the years that he hadn't been there, my mum, a special lady, said, "You'd like him if you met him." She never said a bad word about him, which was amazing. And all this emotion came out. And that resonated with Joseph when he ran out because he couldn't bear it. And he cried bitterly, because he'd met his brothers. And so that's a very special moment for me in that story. And obviously, they came to stay and live there. And we can sort of get lots of conclusions from this. But that section that we read in Genesis 42, 28 to 32, if I could just bring that up again. I read it in the Message version, which I don't often do, but I did for this one, and it was great. 28 to 32. So I've got the right chapter. That's right. When they came to their father Jacob in land of Canaan, they told him all that happened to them, and they said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us, treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the younger is now with his father.'" I think I've written the wrong number down because there's a different reading that we read. It was later. Anyway, I've forgotten the point now. It was the reunion when he met his father that was something very special. And he was in a position to recognise that God had helped his family and appreciated that God had arranged all this, and he needed to go through all that he'd gone through. There was, what was the first thing? Prison. And then, being sold first of all, and then he went to prison, and so on. He'd gone through a lot that made him grow up, make him realise God was in control of his life. And I've lost my train of thought now. What we need to draw a conclusion from the story in the fact that we all have different family situations, we all have different work situations, where we live, financial difficulty or not, things we can cope with or not cope with, ability to do different things. Some are good at supporting other people, some are good practically, some are good organisers, some are good prayer warriors, some are good at witnessing, but rarely are we good at everything. And this story of Joseph is really encouraging to those of us that make mistakes and get things wrong. God is there, he forgives us when we are wronged against, and he helps us to be gracious and forgiving. And if we ask him to forgive us our sins, then he will forgive us. Only God can forgive sins, because in the form of Jesus, he came to this earth to show us the Father and the kingdom of heaven. Then he proved his love by taking the punishment that we so readily deserve for our sins. And we need to recognise that we are sinners in the first place. And we are nothing without God. And if we ask him to forgive us our sins, then he will forgive us. Only God can forgive sins, because in the form of Jesus, he came to this earth to show us the Father and the kingdom of heaven. Then he proved his love for each one of us by taking the punishment that we deserve on the cross. That cross at Calvary, such an awful death. But he was willing to do that. And he was the only one that could do that because he was perfect. And because he was sinless, he didn't deserve to die. But he took our punishment willingly so that we could be free from the guilt of sin. And we do feel guilty, don't we? Well, we don't want to feel guilty for eternity because that's not the place to be. We can be cleansed by the blood that Jesus shed on the cross. And that he shed that for each one of us. Not for clever people, not for rich people, not for poor people. He did it for us, for you and me. And do you know that for yourself? Do you know that your sins are forgiven? And the sooner you are forgiven, the sooner your life will have much more meaning. You turn your life over to God, and then you can do so much more satisfying things, so much more glorious things that will be to God's glory. And when we go through hard times, it's for a reason that God knows. Joseph had the real highs and lows in life. Through it all, he recognised that God was fulfilling his purposes. He didn't always appreciate what he was going through, but God blessed him and helped him in each of the circumstances that he went and made him a good witness to everyone else. And he showed that God was there with him. The prisoners, the people in Potiphar's household, the people of Egypt, and not to mention his own, very own family. They could see God working in his life. And if you've been smoothing a piece of wood, which I'm not sure you have, but a smooth piece of wood feels lovely. You can touch your cheek, that feels nice and smooth if you've shaved. And yeah, the wood feels lovely and smooth. And there's something really nice about a nice piece of wood that's been finished off lovely, or any material really. You can feel the wow factor. This is certainly what God did with Joseph through his many trials. He turned him into a wonderful, gracious servant. And James says, consider it a sheer gift when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. How do we cope with these tests? He often brings someone else into the situation to help. But these tests develop perseverance and makes us become mature and complete. We can be confident that God is working for his glory through us. Sometimes it's more than we think we can cope with, but he often brings somebody else to help us at that time. But it doesn't become quite so bad and becomes much more manageable. Success in small trials helps us to cope with the bigger trials. God wants us to be prepared to take these trials on so that he can show his power. He can help more people to know him, and we give him the glory. You will find that God is powerful. He prepares us for service, shows us small things to do first, but slowly, as he changes us, sanctifies us, gives us more skills to do things. He changes our bad habits into good attitudes. He makes us depend on him, not in our own strength, not in our own wisdom, because he is dependable. He is infinitely valuable. He brings us joy in difficulties. Other people are watching us. What do they see? What do we preach? Do we preach what we do? Do we preach by what we do? Do we preach by what we say? There's so much more. But I'd just like to read James chapter 1. James, I'm trying to think where James is. My brain's gone blank. It's awful, isn't it? That's after Timothy, Hebrews, James. There we go. It's coming. James. James 1, verses 2 and 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. If you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So there, we will face trials in our daily lives, and God will help us through it if we trust him. We put him first in our lives, and it's amazing what God does do, how he changes things, how he makes it bearable for us, and then we see people's lives change through our witness, our testimony, our help, and they come to know and love the Lord as well, and it's great. So I will finish there, and may God bless you, and I hope your life will become smooth and lovely, that people will enjoy knowing and seeing because you love the Lord Jesus. Should we just pray?